The galaxy had known peace for as long as any civilization could remember. The Galactic Treaty was an ancient document, signed millennia ago, that prohibited all forms of armed conflict between the hundreds of species that shared the stars. War, in the eyes of the galaxy, was a relic of a primitive past, something that had long been abandoned in favor of diplomacy, trade, and cooperation. Yet, among the thousands of races that inhabited the galaxy, there was one noticeable absence from this grand peace agreement: humans. No one talked openly about why humanity had never been offered a place at the table. Some said that humans were too new, too inexperienced in galactic matters, while others whispered that they had been purposely excluded, left in the shadows because they were seen as too dangerous. Still, their exclusion was accepted without question, like an unspoken rule that no one dared break. Humanity existed in the background, tucked away on the fringes of the galaxy, ignored but never forgotten. The Galactic Council, made up of the most advanced civilizations, oversaw everything. Their purpose was to ensure that peace continued and that no species ever strayed too far into the dangerous path of militarization. Every few cycles, the Council would review the status of lesser-known species, determining whether they could be integrated into the broader community. But humans? They were never on the list. Rumors swirled among the younger races. Some believed that humans were a backward species, still too primitive to join such an enlightened galaxy. Others thought that humanity had simply not advanced far enough, that their technology and culture were not at the level required to participate in galactic diplomacy. But there were darker, more fearful rumors as well, whispers that suggested humans were capable of things the galaxy wasn't prepared to face. Stories of their violent past, their brutal conflicts, and their unmatched resilience were passed around like ghost stories, tales of a species that thrived in the chaos of war, rather than shying away from it. It was against this backdrop that a diplomatic mission was dispatched to Earth. The Galactic Council had sent an emissary, a representative from one of the most peaceful races in the galaxy, tasked with observing humanity and determining whether their exclusion from the treaty was still justified. The mission was simple: observe, gather data, and report back. If humanity had evolved past their warlike tendencies, perhaps they could be reconsidered for inclusion. If not, well, the galaxy would continue to watch from afar, always wary. The diplomat arrived in Earth's orbit unnoticed, hidden by the advanced cloaking technology of their ship. From this vantage point, they could observe the planet without fear of detection. At first glance, Earth was much like any other inhabited world, a blue-green sphere teeming with life, with vast cities sprawled across its surface. But something about it felt different. There was an intensity to it, a kind of raw energy that pulsed from every corner of the planet. The diplomat began their observations, using the ship's sensors to scan the planet's surface and its inhabitants. What they found was unexpected. Humanity, it seemed, was not as primitive as some had assumed. They had technology, industry, and culture that rivaled many of the more advanced species in the galaxy. They had built towering cities, created intricate machines, and developed a complex global society. But what stood out the most wasn't their advancements, it was their history. As the diplomat delved into the records of human history, they uncovered a story that was unlike anything they had ever encountered. War, it seemed, was not just a part of human history, it was woven into the very fabric of their existence. From the earliest records, humans had fought. They fought for territory, for resources, for power, for survival. And yet, no matter how many wars they fought, no matter how many times they nearly destroyed themselves, they always emerged stronger, more resilient. The diplomat reviewed footage of Earth's greatest conflicts, the world wars, civil wars, revolutions, and even skirmishes that took place beyond their own planet in the far reaches of their solar system. What was most striking wasn't the destruction or the chaos, it was the aftermath. Every time humanity seemed on the brink of collapse, they rebuilt. They adapted. They innovated. It was as if conflict was not a hindrance to their progress, but a catalyst for it. This realization unsettled the diplomat. In the Galactic Council's view, war was something to be avoided at all costs. It was destructive, wasteful, and ultimately unnecessary. But for humanity, conflict seemed to be a part of their evolution. They didn't just survive wars, they grew from them. And yet, despite their long history of violence, the humans on Earth today were not at war. They were living in relative peace, cooperating on a global scale in ways that would have been unimaginable just a few centuries earlier. The diplomat was conflicted. Humanity's capacity for war was undeniable, but so was their capacity for peace. They had developed technologies that could heal the sick, feed the hungry, and connect the farthest corners of their planet in an instant. Their culture was rich with art, music, and ideas that inspired not just their own kind but anyone who could witness it. There was a beauty to their chaos, a strength in their contradictions. As the diplomat continued their observations, they began to understand why humanity had been excluded from the Galactic Treaty. It wasn't because they were too primitive or too violent, it was because they were something else entirely. Something the galaxy had never encountered before. Humans were not a species that could be easily categorized or controlled. They were unpredictable, capable of both great destruction and immense creation. And that made them both dangerous and extraordinary. The diplomat knew that their report to the Galactic Council would be difficult. How could they explain what they had seen? How could they describe a species that thrived in the very thing the galaxy feared most? The diplomat continued their silent observation of humanity, digging deeper into their complex history. What they had learned so far had already challenged many assumptions, but now they sought to uncover the deeper intricacies of this species that the galaxy had chosen to ignore. They began to focus on the darker moments in human history, the ones filled with destruction, suffering, and relentless conflict. But even in these moments, humanity displayed something unique, an ability to endure. As the diplomats sifted through the archives, one truth became increasingly clear: war was not an anomaly in human history, it was a constant. From the earliest tribal skirmishes to the advanced space-age conflicts, humans had engaged in warfare time and time again. Civilizations rose and fell based on the outcome of battles, yet somehow, humans never seemed to learn the same lesson that the Galactic Council had enforced for millennia. They didn't avoid war. They adapted to it. Humanity's conflicts, spanning thousands of years, were not merely fights over land or resources. They were ideological, cultural, and sometimes, seemingly inexplicable. Wars had been fought over religion, over politics, over nothing more than pride. And yet, there was something remarkable about how each conflict shaped the species. With each war, humans didn't just recover, they innovated. After every major conflict, their technology advanced, their societal structures became more complex, and their understanding of themselves deepened. The diplomat watched in awe as the history of human warfare unfolded. The First World War, a catastrophic global conflict, was followed by remarkable leaps in science, technology, and medicine. The Second World War, even more devastating, led to the creation of institutions designed to maintain peace, a global acknowledgement that cooperation was not only necessary but essential for survival. And even beyond the wars that ravaged the 20th and 21st centuries, humanity had developed weapons and technology that had the potential to end all life on Earth, yet they hadn't used them. This restraint was baffling to the diplomat. The very weapons that could reduce entire continents to ash had remained dormant for decades. Humanity, despite its history of violence, had somehow learned to live under the constant threat of destruction without succumbing to it. They had developed the means to annihilate themselves, and yet they chose not to. It was a paradox that defied logic. And then there was the matter of how humans treated one another during times of peace. Though they fought wars, they also built societies that valued empathy, cooperation, and creativity. They invested in technologies that allowed them to communicate instantly across vast distances, share knowledge, and improve the lives of others. They created art that expressed their deepest emotions, their hopes, and their fears. They explored the stars, not just to conquer but to understand the universe around them. The diplomat found themselves becoming more and more intrigued by humanity's resilience. This was a species that didn't break under pressure. Instead, they grew stronger. Every conflict, every hardship, seemed to fuel their drive to survive, to innovate, to push beyond their limits. It was as if conflict, instead of destroying them, refined them. While other species had crumbled in the face of war, humans had used it as a stepping stone to something greater. In their studies, the diplomat uncovered a curious aspect of human culture that further added to the mystery. Despite their capacity for violence, humans also had an extraordinary capacity for compassion. In the aftermath of their greatest wars, they had rebuilt not just their cities but their relationships. They helped one another, formed alliances, and shared resources in ways that were, in many cases, unprecedented in the galaxy. After the devastating world wars, humans established humanitarian organizations dedicated to the relief of suffering. They invested in peacekeeping forces, developed international treaties, and worked toward global cooperation, actions that seemed to contradict their warlike nature. Even more perplexing was their ability to forgive, to rebuild relationships with former enemies. Nations that had once sought to destroy each other became allies, working side by side to ensure that such conflicts would never happen again. This, the diplomat realized, was humanity's greatest strength, the ability to evolve from conflict, to learn from their mistakes, and to move forward, not as fragmented survivors, but as a unified species. It wasn't that they sought war, but when it came, they emerged from it transformed, more resilient, and more determined to create a better future. But there was still an underlying tension within human society. Despite their progress, despite their peacekeeping efforts, the diplomat could sense that conflict was never far from the surface. Humanity had learned to keep war at bay, but they hadn't eradicated the potential for it. Their history, full of brutal conflicts and hard-earned peace, suggested that war would always remain a part of their existence. What fascinated the diplomat most was the humans' approach to this potential for conflict. Instead of pretending it didn't exist, they prepared for it. Their military forces remained powerful, their technological advances and weaponry were unparalleled, and yet, they wielded this power with caution. It was as if they understood better than any other species the true cost of war. They had learned, perhaps the hard way, that unchecked aggression led to ruin. And so, they kept their weapons ready but unused, their soldiers trained but not deployed. The diplomat was beginning to see why the Galactic Council had been so cautious about humanity. This species was unpredictable. They were capable of immense violence, but also incredible restraint. They could build weapons that could destroy planets, yet they used that same technology to explore the stars and solve complex global problems. They were both the most dangerous and the most disciplined species the diplomat had ever encountered. In the quiet moments of their observation, the diplomat couldn't help but wonder what would happen if humanity were to be brought into the galactic fold. Would they bring their capacity for conflict with them, introducing war into a galaxy that had long since outlawed it? Or would they use their unique understanding of conflict to help the galaxy avoid the very thing that had shaped them? One thing was clear: humanity was not like any other species. They had evolved not just in spite of conflict, but because of it. They were a species forged in the fires of war, yet tempered by the desire for peace. The diplomat understood now that humanity's exclusion from the Galactic Treaty wasn't just a precaution, it was a recognition of their potential. Whether that potential was for good or for ill remained to be seen. The diplomat's observations had left them with more questions than answers. The paradox of humanity, violent yet peaceful, destructive yet creative, was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. And now, after days of quiet observation, the time had come to make contact. The diplomat, representing the Galactic Council, needed to understand how humans viewed themselves and their place in the universe. Upon reaching out to Earth's leaders, the diplomat was met with an unexpected response. The humans were calm, almost as if they had been expecting this moment for some time. There was no panic, no scrambling to understand the intentions of an alien species. Instead, the humans simply acknowledged the contact and agreed to a conversation. This was not the behavior of a species unused to the presence of extraterrestrial life. The diplomat quickly realized that humans were far more aware of the galaxy than they had let on. The human representatives were not politicians or generals, as the diplomat had expected. Instead, they were scientists, thinkers, and strategists, people who were used to analyzing, not reacting. The initial discussion was straightforward: with the humans welcoming the diplomat and the Galactic Council's interest in their world. But as the conversation unfolded, the diplomat realized that the humans were holding something back. They were cautious, careful not to reveal too much, but there was an unmistakable undercurrent of control. These were not people on the defensive. They were people in command of their own fate. The diplomat presented the Galactic Council's position, explaining the long-standing treaty that had kept the galaxy in a state of peace for millennia. They spoke of the Council's desire to maintain harmony across the stars and of humanity's exclusion from the treaty due to their history of conflict. The question was simple: had humanity advanced enough to be reconsidered for membership, or were they still too dangerous to be included in the Galactic Order? The human representatives listened politely, but when they finally responded, their words were unexpected. One of the leaders, a calm and composed figure, leaned forward slightly and asked, "Do you know why we never asked to join?" The question caught the diplomat off guard. Most species were eager to be part of the Galactic Treaty, to enjoy the protections and benefits that came with membership. Yet here were humans, seemingly indifferent to their exclusion. The diplomat admitted they did not know why humanity had never petitioned for inclusion. The human leader smiled, a small, knowing smile. "We knew about the treaty. We've known for quite some time. But we also knew that it wasn't for us." The diplomat struggled to understand. How could they know about the treaty and not seek to be part of it? How could they willingly choose isolation? The human continued. "The treaty is based on a simple premise: avoid conflict at all costs. But that's not how we work. For us, conflict isn't something to be feared, it's something to be understood. We don't seek war, but we don't avoid the realities of it either." The diplomat pressed for clarification. Did this mean humanity saw war as inevitable? The humans shook their head. "No, it means we understand that conflict shapes us. We've learned from it, and we've become stronger because of it. But that doesn't mean we want it. In fact, we've developed ways to prevent it, ways the rest of the galaxy might not understand." The room grew quiet for a moment as the diplomat considered this. Could it be that humans, in their strange relationship with conflict, had found a way to control it in a way no other species had? The diplomat decided to push further, asking about humanity's military capabilities. After all, if they had been excluded due to their violent tendencies, surely their weapons posed a significant threat. The human leader didn't hesitate. "Yes, we have weapons. Weapons that could wipe out entire civilizations if we chose. But we don't use them. We've developed technologies that make war obsolete, not because we fear destruction, but because we understand its consequences better than anyone." The diplomat was taken aback by the confidence with which the humans spoke. It was as if they held the keys to an unspoken power, one they had no interest in flaunting but would not hesitate to use if necessary. The human continued, "Our greatest strength isn't in our weapons or our military. It's in our ability to understand conflict at its core. We've seen what happens when civilizations try to avoid conflict without addressing its root causes. They stagnate. They weaken. But we've learned to harness conflict, to turn it into something that drives us forward." This was a concept completely foreign to the diplomat. In the Galactic Council's view, conflict was to be avoided at all costs. Yet here was humanity, suggesting that it could be a tool for growth, a means of evolving into something greater. The diplomat asked cautiously whether this meant humanity believed conflict was necessary for survival. The humans shook their head. "Not conflict itself. What's necessary is the ability to adapt, to face challenges head-on. We've developed ways to prevent war not by avoiding it, but by understanding it better than anyone else. Our technology isn't just designed to destroy, it's designed to prevent the need for destruction." The diplomat was now fully intrigued. Humanity wasn't the warmongering species the Council had feared. They were something entirely different. They had the power to wage war on a scale unimaginable to most species, yet they chose not to. Their restraint wasn't born out of fear, but out of understanding. One of the other human representatives spoke up. "We don't want war. But we know that the galaxy isn't always going to be peaceful. We've seen what happens when conflict is ignored. And that's why we've prepared. Not to wage war, but to stop it before it even starts. The diplomat asked the most pressing question on their mind. What would happen if the Galactic Council decided to keep humanity excluded from the treaty? Would they retaliate? The human leader's smile returned, calm and assured. No. We don't need to be part of your treaty. We've thrived without it. But understand this, if the galaxy ever needs us, we'll be ready. We don't fight unless we have to. But if we do, it won't be like anything you've seen before. The message was clear. Humanity wasn't seeking inclusion in the Galactic Treaty because they didn't need it. They had already mastered the one thing the rest of the galaxy feared most: conflict. And in doing so, they had become something more than the Council could have ever anticipated. They were not warmongers, but guardians of a dangerous knowledge, one that could reshape the balance of power across the stars if ever unleashed. The diplomat left the meeting with a deep sense of unease and respect. Humanity had shown restraint, but the potential for something far greater lingered just beneath the surface. The diplomat's return to the Galactic Council was not met with fanfare or ceremony. The journey back from Earth had given them time to reflect, but the complexity of humanity still weighed heavily on their mind. When the council convened, the diplomats stood before the assembly, ready to report their findings. The anticipation in the chamber was palpable. After all, the mystery surrounding humanity had persisted for centuries. Today, that mystery would be confronted. The diplomat began by recounting their initial observations. Earth was a world of contradictions. Humanity had mastered technology and culture, yet their history was steeped in conflict. This was no surprise to the Council, who had long viewed humanity's warlike tendencies as the reason for their exclusion. But what came next silenced the room. The diplomat explained that, while humanity had the capacity for war, they also possessed something far more dangerous: a profound understanding of conflict itself. The council members shifted uneasily. They had always believed that peace was the ultimate goal, that the avoidance of war was the mark of an advanced civilization. Yet here was a species that didn't avoid conflict. They faced it, studied it, and learned from it in ways no other species had. This was a perspective the Council had never encountered. The question now wasn't whether humanity was dangerous. It was whether their understanding of conflict could destabilize the galaxy. One of the senior council members finally spoke up, his voice tense. So they are warmongers after all? The diplomats shook their head. No. They have the power to wage war, but they choose not to. Their weapons could destroy entire civilizations, but they remain unused. Humanity doesn't seek conflict, but they've learned how to prevent it by mastering its nature. A murmur spread through the assembly. The idea that a species could control conflict without succumbing to it was unheard of. The Council had spent millennia crafting treaties and laws to keep peace, always under the assumption that war must be avoided at all costs. But humanity didn't see war as something to be feared, they saw it as something to be understood. Another voice, from a different council member, questioned the diplomat. If they have this knowledge, what's stopping them from using it to dominate the galaxy? Why should we trust them? The diplomat paused, choosing their words carefully. Humanity doesn't want to dominate. They know the cost of war better than any of us. Their history is full of devastation, but every time they faced destruction, they rebuilt. They grew stronger, not because they avoided conflict, but because they learned from it. They've built their strength on restraint, not aggression. The Council's tension didn't ease. For many, the idea of a species capable of such control over conflict was as terrifying as it was intriguing. How could they be certain that humanity wouldn't turn this knowledge against them one day? The Council had always relied on peacekeeping treaties to prevent war. But here was a species that didn't need those treaties to keep the peace. They had developed something far more dangerous: the discipline to wield overwhelming power without using it. The debate grew heated. Some members argued that humanity could be an asset, a powerful ally in maintaining galactic peace. If humanity had mastered conflict, then perhaps they could offer insights the Council had never considered. But others were less convinced. What if humanity's understanding of war made them unpredictable? What if, one day, they decided that peace was no longer in their interest? The diplomat listened as the council members debated, their voices growing louder with each passing moment. This was the heart of the issue: trust. Could the council trust a species that had never been part of the galactic order? Could they risk allowing humanity, with all its potential for destruction, into the fold? Finally, the diplomat spoke again, their voice cutting through the clamor. I met with their leaders. They don't want war. They don't need it. They understand the power they hold, but they also understand the responsibility that comes with it. They've chosen peace, not because they are weak, but because they know what will happen if they don't. The room fell silent once more. The diplomat's words hung heavy in the air. Humanity's strength wasn't in their weapons or their technology. It was in their restraint. They had the means to destroy, but they had learned to control it. In a galaxy where war had been eradicated through treaties and agreements, humanity had found peace through understanding. This was something the Council had never encountered before, and it forced them to confront their own assumptions. One of the more cautious Council members, still skeptical, asked the diplomat, "What if they change their minds? What if, one day, they decide that war is the answer?" The diplomat met the question head-on. "If they change their minds, it won't be because we pushed them away. It will be because we failed to see what they offer. They don't need our treaty, but if they are included, they can help us understand what we've spent so long avoiding." The council members exchanged glances. The diplomat's report had left them with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear: humanity wasn't a species that could be easily categorized. They were not bound by the same fears or rules as the rest of the galaxy. They were something else entirely. Something that the Council had never faced before. And that made them both a potential ally and a potential threat. The senior Council member, who had spoken earlier, addressed the room. "We have a decision to make. Do we continue to exclude them, leaving them on the fringes, or do we take the risk and allow them into the treaty?" The debate began again, but this time, the tone was different. There was no longer the same certainty that exclusion was the safest option. The possibility that humanity could offer something valuable, something the Council had never considered, was now on the table. But so was the risk that they could upset the balance of peace that had existed for millennia. As the debate raged, a message arrived from Earth. It was a simple, concise communication, sent to the Galactic Council as the diplomat's report was being discussed. The message read, "Never give us a reason to go to war." The impact of those words was immediate. The council members understood what they meant. Humanity wasn't threatening the galaxy, they were warning it. As long as the galaxy remained at peace, humanity would remain peaceful. But if pushed, if provoked, they would not hesitate to defend themselves. The message was clear: humanity had chosen peace, but they would not be passive if that peace was threatened. The council members fell into a heavy silence. The decision before them was monumental. Humanity had shown restraint, had proven their understanding of conflict. But could the Council trust that restraint to hold? In the end, the Council's choice wasn't just about humanity. It was about the future of the galaxy, and whether it was ready to embrace a species that had mastered the very thing the Council had spent millennia trying to suppress. As the session came to a close, the diplomat left the chamber with the weight of the decision heavy on their shoulders. Humanity had made their position clear. They didn't need the Council's treaty, but if the galaxy ever needed them, they would be ready. And the galaxy would have to decide whether to take that chance.